The first time the elevator opened on floor 1, there were people inside. Not passengers, not maintenance. Just people standing shoulder to shoulder beneath the jaundiced ceiling light. All of them facing forward, all of them perfectly still, as if the car had risen from some buried depth carrying the dead up to where the living worked. And every one of them was barefoot. I did not step in. Even now, that feels like the last normal decision I ever made. It happened at 11:43 p.m. on a Thursday in the sort of office tower that looked respectable in daylight and vaguely abandoned after dark. 42 floors of smoked glass and brushed steel. Owned by a financial firm with more cameras than employees and hallways so quiet at night you could hear the air conditioning click on 3 offices away. I was only there because of a deadline and a mistake, which is how these things always start. A missing contract, a partner screaming over email, a junior associate too underpaid to go home when she should. Me. My name is Lena Voss, and on the nights this happened, I worked on the 31st floor. By then, the building had emptied out in layers. First, the interns with their backpacks and apologetic smiles. Then the assistants in pairs riding down together because the elevators felt less lonely that way. Then the attorneys who pretended not to be exhausted, loosening their ties as they stepped into private cars waiting at the curb. By 11, the whole floor belonged to fluorescent light, humming computers, and me. My heels were off under the desk. My coffee had gone cold. The city beyond the window was all red taillights and black glass and rain. The rain matters. It had started around 9, hard enough that it drew silver rivers down the windows and made the lower streets disappear in a shifting haze. I remember looking out and feeling, for no reason I could explain, that the building was not standing in the city anymore, that it was floating above it. 42 stories of lit windows lifted out of the world and left hanging in the dark. By 11:30, I had the sign pages I needed printed and clipped. All that remained was to leave them in the overnight file room on 12. I could have used the stairs. I know that now. But nobody takes 31 flights of stairs down in heels carrying a Redwell and a laptop bag when there's an elevator 20 feet away. I packed up, rubbed my eyes, and crossed the floor. The office after midnight always felt wrong in subtle ways. The glass walls of conference rooms turned black and mirror-like. The copier room was a white square of light with nobody inside. Motion sensors clicked lamps on one section at a time as I walked, then let darkness close behind me. My footsteps sounded too crisp on the polished concrete. The whole floor was designed to feel modern and open and expensive. But in those hours, it resembled a museum after evacuation, full of dead money and trapped reflections. At the elevator bank, there were 6 doors. 4 were dark. One had a paper sign taped to it, out of service call pending. The last one was active, the digital display over it ticking upward with lazy red numbers. 22. 23. 24 point. I pressed the down button and shifted the file against my hip. While I waited, I checked my phone. No signal. That happens sometimes in storms. I slid it back into my pocket and looked up again. 27. 28. 29 point. The car was already coming from above me. That should have felt ordinary. It didn't. I had been alone for hours. No one should have been riding down from the executive floors. Those floors were always empty by 7, and access to them required keycards I didn't have.
Still, I told myself it was security.
Cleaning crew. Someone else working late. 30. 31 point. The elevator arrived with a soft ding. The doors parted, and there they were. 7 people, maybe 8. It's strange that I still can't say for sure because I stared right at them. But the eye doesn't count well when fear gets in first. Men and women in office clothes that looked somehow older than ours, cuts too stiff, lapels too wide, skirts below the knee, pale shirts buttoned too high. Their clothes were damp at the hems as if they had walked through water. Their feet were bare against the elevator floor, grayish in the fluorescent light. Not dirty, not bloody. Just bare, all of them, toes slightly splayed from standing too long. No one moved when the doors opened. No one made room for me. The man nearest the panel had his finger resting on a button that didn't exist. That was what I noticed before their faces. A square of dark metal beneath B1, unlit but unmistakable, labeled. 1R building had 3 basement levels. Parking, storage, mechanical. I knew that because I had once spent 2 miserable hours in B3 looking for archived closing binders. There was no floor 1. I blinked, looked again. The button was gone. Just B1, B2, B3. When I lifted my eyes to the people, I understood why I hadn't seen their expressions at first. They weren't looking at me. They were all looking at my reflection in the mirrored back wall of the elevator. Cold moved across my scalp. I stepped back instinctively, clutching the Redwell so hard the metal clip bit my palm. The nearest woman was middle-aged, heavy-lidded, with wet strands of dark hair glued to one cheek. Her blouse was cream silk, old-fashioned, and caved inward at the throat as if the body beneath it had lost weight too quickly. She stared not at me but at the version of me in the mirror behind her. Her mouth hung slightly open. I remember thinking she looked thirsty. "Sorry," I said automatically, because politeness survives things it shouldn't. The doors began to close. Not one of them reached for the open button. For one ridiculous second, I nearly lunged forward. I still had to go downstairs. I still had work to drop off. My mind was clawing around for practical explanations, some kind of prank. A costume party, a corporate event in another tenant's suite, a group from the street who had somehow wandered in. Then the doors narrowed to a seam and the oldest man in the back lifted his hand. Just 2 fingers. Not waving, beckoning. The doors slid shut. The red number above the elevator changed. 31. 32. 33.1 stood there without breathing until the service bell chimed behind me from somewhere deep in the floor. A harmless electronic note that sounded exactly like someone clearing their throat in the dark. I wish I could say I ran immediately. Instead, I did what people do when reality malfunctions in front of them. I tried to make it make sense. I pressed the down button again. Nothing happened. Pressed harder. The display showed the car descending. 28. 29 point then, instead of continuing, it vanished. The red numbers blanked out entirely. No direction arrows. No floor. A dead screen. I backed away. At that exact moment, one of the overhead lights in the hall flickered, buzzing with a weak insectile stutter. Then another. The shadows between the elevator banks lengthened and softened. Rain hissed against the windows at the end of the corridor. Somewhere above us, pipes moaned. I told myself to go to the stairs. I didn't move, because I had just realized something else. The people in the elevator hadn't been wet from the rain. Their clothes were dry everywhere except from the knee down. As if they had been standing in water. As if the water had slowly dropped. A voice behind me said, "You saw them too." I made a sound I've never made before or since and spun so fast the folders slipped from my grip. Papers fanned across the floor. It was only Malik, one of the night security guards. Only Malik, but he looked nearly as bad as I felt. His uniform shirt was wrinkled, his badge askew, and sweat had darkened the collar despite the cold. He was in his 50s, heavyset, usually impossible to rattle. I'd seen him talk down drunks in the lobby and once escort a furious client out with the patience of a saint. That night his eyes were bloodshot and fixed on the elevator display as if he expected it to wake up. "Jesus," I snapped, crouching to gather the papers. "Don't do that." He didn't apologize. Just kept staring at the doors. "You saw them," he repeated. I straightened slowly. His gaze shifted to me at last, and what I saw there, more than fear, more than anxiety, was recognition. The expression of a man hearing someone describe the exact nightmare he'd been afraid to admit he had. "In the car," he said. "Bare feet." Looking at the mirror, a beat passed between us. The air conditioning hummed overhead. "You've seen them before?" I asked. Malik swallowed. His throat clicked audibly.
Not me.
He hesitated.
Well, once.
On camera. But Tomas saw them in person. Tomas, the other night guard. Tuesday nights. He quit yesterday. That pulled me out of my fear just enough to get angry. "Okay, stop. What is this? Some building story? You're telling ghost stories to the employees now? I'm telling you not to use the elevators after 11:30. His voice was flat, exhausted, not dramatic in the least. That frightened me more than if he'd tried to scare me. I laughed once, too sharp. "That's not an answer." "No," he said. "It's advice." He stooped, picked up a page that had skidded near his shoe, and handed it to me.
His fingers trembled.
I noticed then that he held a radio in his other hand and that the radio was emitting a low burst of static every few seconds, like someone breathing into it from very far away. I gathered the rest of the papers and shoved them back into the folder.
What did Tomas see?
Malik looked down the empty hall before answering as if he expected someone else to be listening. He said the elevator opened on a level that ain't in the building. Display showed 1. Doors opened. No one got out. He said he could hear water splashing in the car, real soft, like people shifting their feet in a shallow pool. Malik's mouth tightened. Then one of them asked him what year it was. The rain seemed to grow louder. Why would you even? Because the camera got it. I froze. You have footage? Malik nodded once. Ad, show me. He didn't answer.
Molly.
He rubbed his jaw with a shaking hand. We sent it to management. Next day, file was corrupted. IT says maybe the storm. Building manager says maybe compression artifact made the floor label look wrong. Says Tomas panicked. Filled in the rest. He looked at me with a kind of helpless disgust.
Tomas don't panic. 21 years in prison.
Marine before that, and he quit because of this? He quit because later that same night the elevator opened again. Empty this time. Floor dry, but there were wet footprints leading out. Neither of us looked down the hall.
That was the thing we were both avoiding.
The hallway carpet between the elevator bank and the corner offices was dark charcoal, dense enough to hide dirt, soft enough to swallow footsteps. If there had been footprints on it, wet, bare, human, there would have been no way to see them unless the light hit just right. I didn't want to know if the light was hitting right. I have to drop this on 12, I said, because my brain was clinging to procedure like a lifeline. Malik actually flinched. Take the stairs. 31 to 12? Yes. That's 19 floors. Yes, you really expect me to believe I expect you. He snapped suddenly, stepping close enough that I could smell stale coffee on his breath, to decide whether you'd rather be tired or sorry. That shut me up. For a second, neither of us said anything. The dead elevator screen stared back, black and reflective. In it, I could see the two of us standing together in the washed-out office light. Beyond us, rows of glass offices. Beyond those, the city guttering in rain.
Fine, I said at last.
Fine. Stairs. Malik exhaled. Some of the tension left his shoulders. I'll walk you to the stairwell. I'm not a child. No, he said quietly. But you're still here. We went. The stairwell door was at the far end of the floor beside an emergency exit sign that cast the walls in weak green. As we walked, motion sensors woke and dimmed around us. The corridor seemed longer than usual, stretching in repeated glass reflections. Twice I glanced back at the elevator bank. Twice I thought I saw the red display flicker on, but when I looked directly, it remained black. At the stairwell door, Malik stopped. You can get to 12 from here, he said. Leave the file. Come straight back up? No. He corrected himself at once, agitated.
No.
Don't come back up. Go down to the lobby after. Stay where people are. I stared at him.
What about my bag?
My laptop, leave it. In my office, yes, that's insane. His radio burst with static so loud we both jumped. Then underneath the crackle, a voice said something. Not words, just a faint compressed murmur, too distorted to understand. Malik lifted the radio slowly toward his face. Control, repeat, the static deepened. Something like water moving through pipes. Then silence. He lowered the radio. His face had gone pale. What? I asked. He didn't answer me. He was staring at the narrow wired glass window in the stairwell door. I turned. At first I saw only the concrete stairs spiraling down and the weak fluorescent light between landings. Then I saw the feet. Bare feet, one flight below us, just visible through the small square of glass. Standing still on the landing, not moving up, not moving down, just there. My whole body locked. The skin on those feet looked waxy and swollen, as if soaked too long in water. Above them, cut off by the frame, hung the hem of a dark trouser leg. A single drop fell from it and struck the concrete. Malik whispered, "Back up." We did, slowly, without taking our eyes off the window. The figure below the landing did not move. Neither did we. Then, with agonizing slowness, another pair of feet stepped into view beside the first. Then a third. standing one flight below us in absolute silence, waiting outside the stairwell door. A sound came from the other end of the hall. The elevator. A soft, polite ding. Malik's head turned first, mine after. At the far end of the corridor, the black display above the elevator had come back to life in a red digital glow. It didn't show a floor number. It showed one word: open. And somewhere beyond the closing distance of that empty hallway, from inside the waiting elevator or the stairwell or perhaps from the walls themselves, a woman's voice said very clearly, "Lena." There are moments when the body decides before the mind does. Before I could think, I ran. Not toward the elevator, not toward the stairwell. Just away from the red glow at the end of the corridor, away from the barefoot shapes gathering below the landing, away from the voice that had spoken my name with the intimacy of a hand at the back of my neck. Malik caught my arm hard enough to hurt and yanked me sideways into the records room. He slammed the door, twisted the lock, and shoved a metal shelving cart in front of it with a screech loud enough to split my skull. The room beyond us was windowless and tight, lined floor to ceiling with gray cabinets and banker's boxes stacked in military rows. It smelled like old paper, dust, printer toner, and the faint sour trace of damp carpet. One motion sensor light buzzed overhead, turning everything the color of stale milk. I bent double, gasping, one hand over my mouth to keep from making noise. Outside, the hallway was silent, not quiet. The kind of silence that feels inhabited. Malik stood with his back to the door, clutching the radio in one hand and his baton in the other. Though the baton looked absurd in that moment, something for drunks and trespassers, not whatever had spoken through steel and concrete in my own voice. His chest rose and fell too quickly. Sweat slid along his temple.
Did you hear that?
I whispered. He didn't answer. Malik. His eyes found mine. It should have comforted me that we had heard the same thing. It didn't. Shared terror is still terror. A tiny red light blinked on his radio. The speaker hissed, then crackled, then resolved into a wash of broken sound. Somewhere inside the static, a voice was talking. A woman, maybe. Fast. Panic. The words tore apart before they reached us. Malik lifted it. "Control, say again. Control." The reply came in shredded fragments. "Lower, not on." Static swallowed the rest. Then another voice cut in, lower and calm. "Too calm. Open the door." Every hair on my arms rose. Malik lowered the radio as if it had bitten him.
"That wasn't Control," I said.
"I know." "Who was it?" He stared at the speaker. "That's Tomas." I felt the room narrow around me. "You said he quit." "He did." "You're saying that was him?" "I'm saying that's his voice." Outside the records room, 3 soft knocks landed on the door. Not pounding, not forcing. Just 3 measured taps, polite as a late client. My lungs forgot how to work. Another 3 knocks came, lower this time, close to where the lock would be. Then silence. I looked at Malik. He lifted one finger to his lips. The light above us flickered once, twice. The buzzing deepened to a low electrical whine. Shadows from the metal shelving rippled over the cabinets like bars moving across water. I became intensely aware of ridiculous things. The paper cut on my thumb from earlier that afternoon, the ache in my left shoulder from carrying my laptop, the tiny pulse jumping beneath the skin of Malik's neck. Then, from the other side of the door, a woman's voice said, very gently, "You left your shoes." I clamped both hands over my mouth, because she was right. My heels were still under my desk. The only person who knew that should have been me. The lock trembled. Not from someone trying the handle. From vibration. The kind that travels through metal when something heavy passes close by it. A low thud moved along the wall outside, then another, as if several people were walking slowly past the records room door in perfect step. Bare feet should not make that sound. These did. Wet, heavy, patient. The footsteps continued down the hall. After a moment, we heard the elevator ding again. Malik counted silently on his fingers. 1, 2, 3. At 10, he let out a breath he'd been holding and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand.
"What do we?"
I whispered. He looked at the door, then at the vent near the ceiling, then back at me.
"We get to the security office. Where is it? Lobby. Basement access monitors there too. Then we go down."
He shook his head so sharply I thought he'd hurt himself. No basement. I didn't say basement, I said down the camera's route through a sublevel room under B3. His voice dropped even further. That's where the old service shaft is. That's where the elevator plans don't match the building. I stared at him.
What does that even mean?
He swallowed. The tower was built over something older. Of course it was. Every terrible story is built over something older. What older original foundation from a hospital burned in '68? They demolished most of it. He glanced toward the door again.
Most.
I let that settle into me like poison. The tower's official history was all polished brochures and redevelopment language. Riverfront revitalization, mixed-use conversion, landmark architecture. No one had ever mentioned a hospital. Certainly not one that had burned down. And yet the moment he said it, something shifted into place in my head. The building's strange depth below street level. The old freight tunnels no one used. The patched-over tile wall I'd once seen in B2 behind a row of server racks, white square tiles, cracked with age, nothing like the rest of the basement finish.
What kind of hospital?
Malik gave a humorless breath that might once have been a laugh. The kind people used to get locked into. Before I could answer, we both heard it. A soft chime from above us. Not the elevator. A phone. We both turned. At the back of the room, on top of a filing cabinet, a black desk phone sat in the pool of weak fluorescent light. An old multi-line office phone with a cord and blinking buttons. I hadn't noticed it when we came in. Maybe because no one had used that room in months. Maybe because it hadn't been there before. It rang again. A shrill, old-fashioned sound that made my spine contract.
Malik said, "Don't."
The phone rang a third time, then stopped. Its speaker light came on by itself, and the room filled with the sound of breathing. Slow, damp, close breathing. Not through a microphone, through a chest, a throat. Like someone standing an inch from the receiver with their mouth open. I backed into a cabinet.
No.
A voice emerged from the phone, wet and faintly distorted. It was a man's voice, elderly, weak. "Please," it said again. They said they were taking us down for air. Malik looked like he might faint. I forced myself to ask, "Who is this?" The breathing caught. Then the voice, suddenly hopeful, "Have they reopened?" I couldn't speak. The line crackled softly. In the background, I heard something impossible. The squeak of gurney wheels, distant and rhythmic, and a muted chorus of people coughing. Not modern sounds. Not office sounds. Hospital sounds, layered beneath static like a recording trapped under another recording. "Hello," the old man said.
"Nurse, it's cold down here."
The fluorescent light overhead flashed off, then on. In that blink of darkness, I saw no, felt the room alter around us. The temperature dropped so fast my skin prickled. The smell of paper and dust vanished under another scent. Damp concrete, antiseptic, mildew, and something faintly rotten, like wet cloth left too long in a sealed room. Malik crossed the space in 2 strides and ripped the cord from the phone. The speaker died. Silence crashed down. The smell lingered. Neither of us moved for several seconds. Then I heard myself say, "Tell me everything." His shoulders sagged. He looked 20 years older than he had an hour earlier. "We started getting complaints about 6 weeks ago," he said. "Single occupants, light night tenants, cleaning crew. Elevators stopping where they shouldn't. Doors opening on blank walls. Calls from empty floors. Radios picking up voices. At first, management blamed the storm system, power fluctuations, software bug. They brought in earlier. Tech said the logs showed car movement below permitted range. Below B3? He nodded. But physical inspection showed no accessible stop. No door, no landing. Nothing, then how, I don't know. The answer was immediate, miserable, and honest. He leaned against a cabinet and rubbed his face. Tomas started digging because he was the kind of man who couldn't leave a thing alone. He found archived building permits. Original site used to house St. Armand Municipal Infirmary, mostly long-term psychiatric and infectious disease care by the end. Malik's gaze drifted. Fire in the lower ward. Official count said 23 dead. Unofficial, he trailed off. "How many?" "They don't agree." Of course they didn't. What does that have to do with the elevator? There was an older service lift in the infirmary. Freight and patient transfer. ran between ground, laundry, storage, and a sub-basement isolation level not listed on public maps. He looked at me. Tomas found references to it in salvage documents. Level designated lower 1. The air seemed to thin. Lower 1, I repeated.
Floor 1.
We stood there listening to the hum of the light. No, I said after a moment, though it sounded weak even to me.
No. Buildings don't keep places you demolished.
Malik's expression was the saddest thing I'd seen all night. Maybe the walls go. Maybe the shaft don't. Before I could answer, a sharp metallic bang rang through the room above us. Both of us flinched and looked up. Another bang. Then a dragging noise across the ceiling directly overhead. Slow.
Weighty.
Something being hauled or crawling through the ductwork or the maintenance crawl space above the records room. The light flickered again. Dust sifted down. I stared upward, sick with the certainty that whatever was up there knew exactly where we were. The dragging stopped above the center of the room. A long pause followed. Then, very softly, directly over our heads, open. It wasn't one voice. It was many. Layered together, men, women, one child, one old man with a ruined raspal speaking at once in perfect unison. Open. The ceiling tile above the phone sagged. Malik moved first. He grabbed my sleeve and pointed to the far corner where a narrow service hatch stood ajar behind a stack of archive boxes. I hadn't seen it. A maintenance access door, waist-y, probably leading into some utility chase that cut between suites. We crossed the room crouching, both trying not to look at the ceiling as another tile bowed downward with a soft shower of grit. The voices above us whispered to each other, too low to make out. Then one of them laughed, not cruelly, hungrily. Malik yanked the hatch open. Cold blackness breathed out of it, carrying the mineral smell of concrete and old water. He shoved aside the boxes and clicked on a tiny flashlight from his belt. The beam revealed a cramped passage just high enough to crawl through, lined with pipes and cable trays vanishing into darkness. "You first?" he whispered. I got down on my knees. Behind us, the ceiling tile tore. Not all the way. Just enough for something wet and pale to press against the opening from above. A hand. Human in shape, swollen beyond proportion, skin blanched and splitting at the knuckles, nails gray and softened as if boiled. It groped blindly through the gap, feeling the air. I made a strangled sound and scrambled into the crawl space so fast I skinned both palms raw. Malik came after me, dragging the hatch almost closed behind him. As soon as the door met the frame, something struck it from the other side.
Once.
Twice. Not with fists, with flat, open palms. Many of them. The metal flexed inward. "Move," Malik hissed. We crawled. The passage bent sharply, dropped by a shallow concrete incline, then narrowed until my shoulders brushed both sides. Pipes overhead sweated cold droplets onto my neck and hair. Cables draped like roots. The flashlight beam bounced wildly with Malik's movement behind me, making the shadows lurch and breathe. The whole space was full of tiny noises, water ticking through old metal, distant groans of the building settling, the scrape of our clothes against grit. And under all of it, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of something moving behind us in the dark. Not crawling, walking. Bare feet slapping wetly on concrete. There shouldn't have been enough room. The passage was too low to stand in, too narrow. Still the sound came nearer. I pushed faster, breath sawing in my chest. "Where does this go?" "South utility shaft," Malik whispered. "Then down to service ladder." "You said no basement. We're not going to the basement. We're cutting past it." That was not reassuring. Ahead, the passage opened slightly into a junction chamber where old valves jutted from the walls and a vertical ladder dropped through a square concrete throat. Rust crawled down the rungs. Blackness pooled below. Malik's flashlight swept once across the shaft wall and caught writing. Words scratched into the concrete in overlapping layers, some old and faded, some fresher, ragged and dark. "Do not let them ask you in. They are not all dead. Keep the doors shut. We can hear them in the water below that." In smaller letters, written with careful pressure, as if the hand had trembled while making it. They opened IT again. I reached for the wall without meaning to. The concrete was slick. Not damp.
Slick.
My fingers came away wet. I lifted them to the light. Not water. Something clear and viscous, smelling faintly of disinfectant and rot. Behind us, in the crawlspace tunnel, the wet footsteps stopped. A hush fell so complete I could hear the blood moving in my ears. Then the flashlight beam slid past Malik's shoulder and landed on the tunnel opening. Someone was crouched there. A woman in a cream blouse, her dark hair hanging in wet ropes across her face, folded impossibly into the low space like a spider in a drain. She was smiling with cracked lips. Her feet were tucked under her at the wrong angle. Her eyes were fixed not on me, but on the space just beside my head, as though someone stood there I could not see. When she spoke, her voice was the same one that had called my name in the hall. "You were on the list," she said. Then she opened her mouth wider than a mouth should open, and behind her, in the dark tunnel, more faces began to gather. I did not scream. That still surprises me. People always imagine terror as noise, shouting, pleading, losing control out loud. But real terror can be almost reverent. It can strip you down to something ancient and still. A rabbit in winter grass. A diver who sees the shape below him in the dark water and understands, all at once, exactly how small he is. I stared at the woman crouched in the tunnel and felt every part of me lock into place. Her smile widened. The skin at the corners of her mouth split soundlessly. Behind her, more of them crowded, the dark faces overlapping. Pale foreheads and wet hair and eyes that reflected the flashlight with the strange flat shine of things that should not possess sight anymore. They did not jostle or push. They simply arranged themselves behind her in patient layers, waiting their turn. "You were on the list," she said again. Malik moved before I could. He swung the flashlight like a club. The metal body struck the concrete beside her face with a crack that sent sparks through the tunnel. The woman jerked backward, not in fear but in surprise, and Malik lunged past me to slam the hatch door at the tunnel junction. The thing was heavier than it looked, a rusted steel panel hanging on one reluctant hinge. It shrieked against the floor as he dragged it across the opening. White hands shot forward through the narrowing gap. Not one pair, many. Swollen fingers clawed at the metal. Nails scraped sparks. Malik put his shoulder into the panel with a grunt, teeth bared, while I stumbled back and grabbed the nearest valve wheel mounted on the wall. It was loose with age, but the central pin held. I wrenched with both hands until it tore free in a squeal of rust. "Here!" I jammed the iron wheel through the latch loops just as the panel slammed shut under the weight from the other side. The impact rang up the concrete shaft like a bell. For half a second everything held. Then the steel began to tremble. The footsteps and scrapes on the far side multiplied, hands drumming against the hatch in a rising storm of wet impacts. The valve wheel shuddered in its brackets. The metal bowed inward a fraction, then sprang back. Malik grabbed my arm and hauled me toward the ladder. The shaft fell away beneath us into lightless depth. The rusted ladder was bolted into concrete stained with long dark trails. My first step onto it almost failed because my shoes slipped on the rung. The slick stuff from the wall had spread onto my palms. "Go," Malik hissed from above. I descended. The flashlight beam jerked wildly over the walls as Malik followed, one hand on the rail, the other clutching the light between his teeth. Above us, the hatch took another heavy blow. Then another. The metal shrieked in protest. Dust and rust flakes pattered down over my hair and shoulders. The shaft seemed much deeper than any utility drop should have been. The air changed as we went, growing colder and denser, carrying that same blend of disinfectant, mildew, and old standing water. At some point, the building noises faded, the hum of ventilation, the distant tick of office life, and were replaced by something else. Faint echoes, hollow spaces. The acoustics of a place not meant for public use. A buried place. After maybe 20 feet, my right foot found concrete. We had reached a narrow landing cut into the shaft wall. Ahead, a thick door of riveted steel stood slightly open. A faded enamel plate beside it had once borne lettering, but only fragments remained.
I/trans.
Unit. Malik climbed down beside me, breathing hard, and swept the flashlight beam over the frame. The paint on the door was blistered. The lower half was striped with ancient watermarks.
"What is this?"
I whispered. His face looked gray in the beam.
"No idea."
But that wasn't true. I could see it on him. He had an idea. He just didn't want to say it aloud because naming a thing can make it real. The hatch above us boomed again. A thin scream of bent metal drifted down the shaft. Malik pushed the steel door open with the side of the flashlight. A corridor lay beyond, not an office corridor, not anything belonging beneath a modern tower. The walls were tiled in white squares gone yellow with age, their grout split and blackened. Pipes ran overhead, wrapped in cracked insulation. Old porcelain numbers had been fixed beside doors on both sides, though many hung crooked or had fallen away. The floor was made of small hexagonal tiles under a shallow film of water that reflected the flashlight in broken strips. And far down the hall, beyond the reach of the beam, a red elevator display glowed in the dark. My stomach turned over.
No, I said.
No, that's impossible. Malik didn't reply. He took 2 steps into the corridor, then froze. The flashlight had found something on the wall to our left, a directory board under cracked glass. St. Armand Municipal Infirmary, Lower 1 isolation/transfer/holding the black letters looked absurdly crisp, as though the sign had been waiting decades for someone to read it again. Lower 1, I breathed. Malik crossed himself. It was the first time I had ever seen him do that. From the shaft behind us came a high metallic snap. The hatch had failed. The first wet footsteps hit the ladder rungs.
We ran.
Water splashed around our ankles as we moved down the tiled corridor, the beam bouncing across open doorways and rusting gurneys abandoned in alcoves. Some rooms were empty except for iron bed frames bolted to the floor. Some held cabinets overturned long ago, their contents reduced to black pulp. In one room, the flashlight swept across a wall so densely scratched with lines that it looked furred. Tally marks. Hundreds of them. We passed a nurse's station with its glass cracked in a spiderweb pattern. The desk behind it was covered in warped paper, old medicine bottles, and a rotary phone with no cord. A smell drifted from somewhere nearby, wet ash. Burn residue. So faint it might have been memory if not for the sting it left in the back of my throat. The footsteps behind us entered the corridor. Not rushing. Never rushing. Just coming. We turned a corner and nearly collided with a row of wheelchairs chained together like shopping carts, their rubber wheels half submerged in dark water. Malik shoved them aside with a crash. The sound exploded through the level. For a heartbeat, the whole buried ward seemed to wake and listen. Then, from far away, too far to be near us, yet somehow right beside my eye, I heard a bell ring. A patient call bell. One sharp trill. Then another. Then 20 at once, a panicked mechanical chorus. Lights flickered overhead. Not modern lights. Old caged fixtures screwed into the tiled ceiling, flaring weakly alive one by one down the corridor. Dim amber pools bloomed in the dark, and with them came movement at the edge of vision. Shapes in room doorways. Figures sitting up on beds. Someone crossing the hall in a hospital gown. I kept running because stopping meant seeing. The corridor opened into a larger chamber that must once have been a transfer bay. Tracks were set into the floor. A freight platform stood rusted to one side. Opposite it loomed the elevator. It was not the polished stainless steel car from upstairs. This thing was older, broader, with accordion-style inner gates behind outer doors painted institutional gray. A black sign above it read "Service Lift" in chipped white letters. And yet the red digital display above the frame was modern, identical to the elevators upstairs, the numbers pulsing with fresh LED clarity. The building had grafted one age onto another, or something below had learned to imitate what was above. Malik grabbed my shoulder. I recoiled. Are you insane? We can't outrun them down here. Do you want to get into the elevator? It may take us up. May? His expression answered for him. The wet footsteps behind us grew louder. Along with them came other sounds now. The squeal of wheels, coughing, low muttering, an occasional wet slap against Kyle. The whole corridor behind us seemed occupied. Not just by the figures from the car, but by an unseen crowd populating the level around them.
No, I said again, backing away.
No elevator. Then the freight bay doors on the far side opened by themselves. Just a few inches. Enough for a face to appear in the crack. It was an old man. Not dead-looking. Not exact. Just terribly ill. Skin the color of paper left in water. Eyes fever-bright and magnified behind one broken spectacle lens. A hospital bracelet sagged from his wrist. He wore a striped patient gown tied badly at the back, and his bare feet stood in the water with the motionless patience of a heron. When he saw me, relief transformed him. "Oh," he whispered, "you did come back." My legs nearly gave out. It was the voice from the phone. He pushed the door wider and limped into the room, dragging one leg. Behind him, other patients filled the corridor, women in gowns, men in undershirts, some bandaged, some bald, some carrying blankets around their shoulders. Their faces were gaunt and frightened. They looked less like ghosts than people caught inside the wrong moment for far too long. "They said no one would," the old man said, shivering. "They said they were moving us because of the smoke, but they locked the lower doors." His eyes darted past me to Malik, then around the transfer bay as if expecting orderlies to emerge. "Is it over upstairs?" Malik had gone rigid.
Sir, he said carefully, what year do you think it is?
The old man frowned, hurt by the question. 68, he said. October. The answer moved through me like ice water. He looked at the elevator. His expression changed. Fear widened his face. "No," he said, "not that one." A woman in a gown behind him began to cry. Not loudly, just a thin, exhausted sound. Another patient clutched a chartboard to her chest and whispered Hail Marys with cracked lips. A younger man with burns mottling one side of his neck stared blankly at the service lift as if hypnotized.
What happened here?
I asked, though I was no longer sure I wanted the answer. The old man licked his lips. "They sealed us in." His eyes had fixed on the elevator display. The smoke came through the laundry tunnel first. Then the alarms. Then the shouting upstairs. They said the service lift would come back down for us. He swallowed with visible pain. But when it opened, the car was already full. Something cold touched the base of my spine.
Full of who?
He looked at me, bewildered that I didn't know. The ones from below. The lights in the chamber dimmed. Behind us, at the mouth of the corridor, shapes began to gather. Office clothes. Wet hems. Bare feet. The same figures from the elevator upstairs emerged into the transfer bay one by one, moving with impossible calm. The middle-aged woman in the cream blouse came first. Beside her, a tall man in a porter's uniform blackened with soot. Then a nurse whose cap was pinned neatly above a face so swollen it seemed poured into shape rather than born. Then others, men and women from different decades of the building's memory. Some in hospital wear, some in office clothes, some in security uniforms, one in a maintenance jumpsuit with a ring of keys hanging from his belt. Tomas, or what had once been Tomas. His head tilted when he saw Malik. His mouth opened in a fond, terrible imitation of a smile. The patients behind the old man began to murmur and recoil. They knew these figures, or feared them for reasons that had survived even if memory had not. "They keep taking names," the crying woman whispered. "They keep making lists." The woman in the cream blouse stepped into the light. Water streamed from her hair, though the corridor behind her was dry tile and shallow standing water. Her eyes were fixed on me with unbearable intensity. "You were filed correctly," she said.
What does that mean?
I asked, my voice cracking. She raised one pale hand and pointed toward a door I had not noticed before near the nurse's station. The enamel plaque hung by one screw, but the word was legible. Something tightened in Malik's face.
Don't listen.
But my eyes had already gone to the half-open door. Inside, through the gap, I could see shelves, cabinets, boxes. A room arranged with deliberate care, unlike the decay elsewhere on the level. Not abandoned, preserved. The woman smiled again. "Your name is there." The patients began to back away. Some pressed themselves against the walls. One man started muttering, "Not again, not again, not again, not again, not again," in a helpless child's rhythm. The figures from the corridor continued their slow advance, spreading out in a semicircle that guided rather than chased us, herding us toward the records room. Malik drew his baton, though his hand shook so violently I thought he might drop it. "Lena, don't go in there." "Why?" But I knew before he answered. "Because Tomas went in." I looked at the thing wearing Tomas's face. He was standing motionless among the others, water dripping from his sleeves. The keys on his belt clinked softly, though he did not move.
What did he find?
Malik's eyes stayed on the approaching line. The old man beside me made a broken sound, almost a sob. They rode us down before the fire. The cream-bloused woman spoke over him, voice smooth as wet silk. They rode everyone down. The figures stopped moving. All at once, the entire bay fell still. Even the call bells had ceased. The elevator display changed. One blinked away. In its place appeared 31. The same floor I had left above. The service lift doors shuttered open. Inside was not the rusty freight car. It was the modern office elevator from upstairs, fluorescent and stainless and spotless, except for one thing lying on the floor in the center of the car, my black heels, set neatly side by side. And in the mirrored back wall, though the elevator was otherwise empty, I could see a reflection that was not mine. A woman stood directly behind me in the glass.
Same height.
Same hair, same suit. Her face hidden because her head was bent over a clipboard, writing my name. I spun around so fast my shoulder slammed into Malik. No one was there. But in the mirrored back wall of the elevator, the woman remained head bowed, pen moving steadily over a clipboard held against her chest. She stood so close behind me that if the reflection had been real, I would have felt the heat of her body through my soaked blouse. Instead, there was nothing at my back except the cold air of the transfer bay and the smell of rust and old antiseptic. My reflection stared wild-eyed into the mirror. The other woman kept writing. Her suit was mine. Same charcoal jacket, same narrow lapel, same rain-darkened sleeve where I had leaned against the window earlier. Same blouse button I had meant to sew tighter for weeks. Even her hair was pinned in the same impatient knot that had already begun to loosen at the base of my neck. Not a resemblance. An addition. A second draft of me. Her face remained hidden because she never looked up. The elevator hummed softly, waiting. Around us, every figure in the transfer bay stood still as statues. The cream-bloused woman.
Tomas with his keys.
The patients shivering in their gowns. The old man from the phone. Even Malik had gone rigid beside me, though I could feel the tremor in his arm where it touched mine. It was as if the entire level had paused to witness a formality. Lena, Malik said under his breath, the word hardly more than air. Don't get in. The reflection's pen stopped. Slowly, with a terrible, intimate calm, the woman in the mirror raised her head, and I was looking at my own face. Not dead. Not decayed. Worse than that. There was no panic in her. No confusion.
No.
She looked like a version of me who had already accepted all of this, who had made peace with every impossible thing beneath the building and now waited only for the rest of me to catch up. Her skin was pale under the office lights, her eyes rimmed dark from exhaustion, but they were unmistakably mine. She smiled. Not kindly, not cruelly, knowingly. Then she lifted the clipboard and turned it outward against the mirror.
I could read the page.
It was an intake ledger. The paper was yellowed, ruled into narrow columns under typed headers. Name.
Date.
Floor. Condition. Transfer status. The ink filling the page was old brown-black. Hundreds of names had been written there in different hands, cursive, block print, hurried scrawls, careful clerk's penmanship. Some entries had dates from 1968. Some from decades later. Some looked recent enough that the ink still glistened. At the very bottom, one new line waited. Lena Voss 16 APR 2026-31. The last columns were blank.
My mouth had gone dry. What is that?
The woman in the mirror tapped the empty spaces with the pen. Condition. Transfer status. Behind me, the old man in the gown whispered, "If they write you in, you stay." His voice shook so badly it seemed to tear him. The crying woman behind him began to repeat, "Don't let them finish, don't let them finish," over and over into her blanket. Malik grabbed my elbow and pulled me back a step. Immediately, the figures ringing the chamber stirred. Not a rush. Just a collective lean forward, like reeds turning toward a current. "They need consent," he said. The cream-bloused woman's smile sharpened. "Not always." Malik ignored her. "Tomas found that out too late. The list doesn't just keep the dead, it keeps anyone who accepts the transfer. Any way in counts. Stepping into the car, giving your name, signing, following your own reflection." The thing wearing Tomas's face tilted its head farther than a neck should allow. "You signed in every night," it said softly. Malik's knuckles whitened around the baton. I stared at Tomas. His uniform was soaked through, the fabric clinging to his chest. Beneath the wet cloth, I could see a dark depression over his left rib cage, as if something had caved inward there. His keys made a delicate chiming sound.
What are they?
I whispered. No one answered immediately. Then the old man from the phone said, "The ones who got used." His fever-bright eyes never left the elevator. Patients first. Locked below when the fire came. Staff who stayed too long. Porters who opened the wrong doors. Anyone left waiting when help didn't come. He swallowed. They took the people who came later too. Once the building forgot what was under it. The cream-bloused woman watched me with unbearable attentiveness. Forgotten things need clerks. My double in the mirror lowered the clipboard and stepped aside. The back wall reflection changed. For an instant I saw not steel but another room behind the elevator, dim, tiled, lit by a swinging yellow bulb. Rows of cabinets. Shelves of ledgers. Water black on the floor. And figures moving between the stacks with clipboards in hand, sorting papers, whispering names to each other. Some wore hospital whites. Some wore modern office attire. Some wore security uniforms. One of them looked up. It was Tomas again. Not the wrecked thing in the bay, but a cleaner version of him, dry and composed, turning pages with bureaucratic concentration. Then the mirror became plain reflective metal again. I understood then that the elevator was not transport in the ordinary sense. It was intake. The bay behind us, the ward, the stairs, the offices above those were only edges of the thing. Symptoms of it. The true body lay elsewhere, in records and repetition, in the endless filing of the lost. The elevator wanted me because I belonged to the building now in all the ways that mattered.
Badge access.
Employee number. Floor assignment. Digital logs. Print records. The place had counted me so many times I had begun to resemble an entry. My heart pounded so hard it blurred my vision. What happens if they finish the line?
I asked.
The old man shut his eyes. The answer came from my own face in the mirror. You help. Every call bell on the level rang at once. The sound detonated through the transfer bay, shrill enough to drive tears into my eyes. Patients cried out and covered their ears. The semicircle of soaked figures took one synchronized step forward. Malik shoved me sideways. Records room. Why? Because if there's a ledger, there's a way to break it. That was desperation talking, but it was more than we had. We ran. The chamber erupted behind us, not into chaos exactly, but pursuit. Wet footsteps slapped tile. Wheels squealed. Someone laughed in delight. The bells continued their frenzied ringing as we splashed down the corridor toward the records room near the nurses' station. The door hung half open, the plaque dangling crookedly on one screw. Inside, the room was far colder than the hall. The air felt layered, stratified, as if decades of breath had never fully mixed there. Metal shelving lined the walls from floor to ceiling. File drawers stood open in narrow ranks. Ledgers were stacked on tables in precise towers, their spines labeled in fading ink and newer marker both. Lower admissions, fire casualties, post-closure transfers, maintenance, night security, tenant holdovers. Tenant holdovers. My stomach lurched. The room was dry except for the far end, where black water pooled beneath a row of low cabinets. It reflected nothing. Not the flashlight. Not just a depthless stain across the floor. Malik kicked the door shut behind us and jammed a broken chair under the handle.
Find your name,
he said. I stared at him. That's your plan? If the line's open, maybe it can be crossed out, destroyed, removed. I don't know. He was already sweeping the flashlight over the shelves. Tomas said the list changes the building. Maybe changing it changes the hold. Outside, the first hands hit the door. The impacts came rhythmically, not frantic. The sound of office workers knocking to be let into a conference room. I moved to the nearest table and started flipping through ledgers. The pages were damp and swollen, yet the names remained legible. Hundreds. Then thousands. Patient names from 1968. Employees from the years after. Contractors. Security guards. Cleaning staff. Random initials. Whole families listed together from the fire. Some entries had notes beside them. Transferred, retained, unclaimed, returned to service. I felt bile rise in my throat. Return to service. The phrase explained too much. Why the figures above wore off his clothes now. Why Tomas stood among them with his keys. Why the elevator still functioned. The building kept using what it took. Behind me, Malik cursed.
Lena.
I looked up. He had found a thinner ledger bound in black oilcloth on a shelf set apart from the rest. Unlike the others, it looked almost new. The cover bore no title, only an embossed square where something had been peeled away. He opened it. The first pages were blank except for dates in recent years. Then entries began.
Building tenant incidents.
Elevator anomalies. Late departures. Individuals logged by floor, time, and disposition. It was a modern continuation of the old system, updated in digital language but following the same grim logic. 22 Oct 2025 janitorial contractor B2 heard voices from freight shaft unresponsive to recall. 03 Deck 2025 security officer Tomas Ibarra lobby/1 threshold partial retention. 17 Yan 2026 legal assistant Mira Dolan 19 visual contact via mirror pending. 28 Feb 2026 elevator technician Evan Score B3 machine room returned to service. 09 APR 2026 security officer Malik Bennett 31/stairwell exposure marked. Malik went still. His breathing changed. I crossed to him and looked lower on the page. 16 APR 2026 Lena Voss 31/direct summons active intake. The words seemed to throb on the paper. Below my entry in fresher ink than the rest, someone had written, "Suitable for records." A terrible softness entered the room. I felt it before I understood it, a loosening in the air, a hush like deep carpet underfoot. The impacts at the door stopped. The bells cut off. Even Malik's breathing seemed to recede. Then a voice behind me said, "It won't hurt once you're inside." I turned. My double stood at the far end of the room beside the black water. Not reflected, present. She held the clipboard against one hip. Up close, she was even worse because she moved exactly as I did, same unconscious shift of weight. Same slight tension in the shoulders, same way of pressing her tongue briefly to a front tooth before speaking. The only difference was her eyes. Mine had panic in them. Hers had purpose. The water at her feet remained perfectly still. Malik raised the flashlight, but its beam dimmed on her skin as though the light itself lost confidence. "You're not real," I said. She gave a faint, almost pitying smile. "Neither is half of what keeps you going." The answer meant nothing and everything. Outside the door, something began whispering. Not one voice. Many. Names, maybe. Lists. A rustling recital. My double extended the clipboard toward me. "Look," she said. Against all reason, I did. The page no longer held the intake line. It held images, one after another, as if the paper were remembering. My cubicle on 31 empty after hours. My shoes beneath the desk. My employee badge in the log scanner. My email drafts. My mother's unread voicemail from 3 days earlier. My apartment with the sink full of dishes. My own face reflected in the train window at 6:12 a.m. every morning. Every routine. Every repetition. Every lonely little groove my life had worn into itself. Then the page changed again, and I saw myself seated at a desk in the room behind the elevator mirror, sleeves rolled up, water creeping around the chair legs while I wrote names in careful columns and never once looked up. "There's no more rushing after that," she said softly. "No more choices you don't know how to make. No more being afraid of calls you haven't returned or years you haven't fixed. You just keep the order. You help the lost arrive." Her voice had become mine completely. And for one horrible second, I understood the temptation. Not death, not exactly. Relief. A life reduced to one function. One endless measurable task. No ambiguity. No guilt except the old kind that dulls with repetition. Just names and doors and the perpetual handling of what others abandoned. I think she saw that understanding in me because her smile deepened. That was when Malik slapped the ledger from my hands. It hit the floor with a wet crack. The spell broke. Noise rushed back into the room, the whispering beyond the door, the drip of pipes, the pound of my own blood. "Don't listen to it," Malik barked. My double's expression hardened for the first time. "Marked," she said, looking at him. The black water at her feet rippled. Something moved beneath the surface. A shape rose slowly, not breaking the water, just distorting it from below. Broad shoulders. A head bent at an unnatural angle. Keys hanging like silver weeds in the dark. Tomas! Not the version at the bay. Something older and deeper. The route from which the others had been copied. Malik backed up a step. Lena. I saw what he was seeing at the same moment. On the spine of the oilcloth ledger where the flashlight struck it sideways, faint letters had emerged from beneath the peeled square. Master register below that, smaller. Lower one custodial index. If there was a heart to this place, this was it. My double followed my gaze and understood immediately. Her smile vanished.
No, she said.
The door behind us bent inward under a sudden violent blow. The chair bracing it snapped in half. Wet hands reached through the widening gap. My double took one step forward, the first true urgency I had seen in her. You cannot leave it unfinished. Maybe she was speaking to me. Maybe to the room. Maybe to the building itself. I snatched the oilcloth ledger from the table and ran for the black water. Malik shouted my name. The room convulsed into motion. My double lunged. Hands burst through the door. The surface of the water split open as something enormous surged upward from beneath. And just before I hurled the master register into that depthless black pool, I saw what was rising to meet it. It was not Tomas. It was an elevator car, impossibly submerged, full of people standing shoulder to shoulder in the dark water, all of them turning at once to look directly at me. I threw the ledger. It spun once through the cold air, black cover flashing in Malik's weak beam, and struck the surface of the pool with a sound too soft for what it was. Not a splash, more like a breath being taken in. For an instant, nothing happened. Then the black water opened. The elevator car beneath the surface rose without disturbing the pool, as if the water were only glass pretending to be liquid. Its roof emerged first, then the fluorescent-lit interior, every bulb burning with that sick office brightness I had come to hate. Inside, the passengers stood packed shoulder to shoulder exactly as I had first seen them on 31 barefoot, wet at the hems, eyes fixed forward. But now I could see all of them clearly. Patients in striped gowns stiff with old smoke. Nurses with scorched sleeves, porters with bandaged hands, security guards in modern uniforms, office workers in damp blazers, ID cards hanging from their necks, men in maintenance coveralls, women in reception black. Decades of the building arranged together inside one impossible car, all of them preserved at the moment they had become entries instead of people. The woman in the cream blouse was at the front. Tomas was behind her. And in the back corner, reflected in the stainless steel wall, sat row after row of desks stretching into darkness, with clerks bent over ledgers in endless lines. My double screamed. It was the first raw human sound she had made. The pool erupted. Water hit the ceiling in a column of black force, taking the ledger with it. Pages burst free in a cyclone of soaked paper. Names wheeled through the room like a flock of trapped birds. The shelves around us rattled. File drawers shot open and slammed shut. Thousands of pages began to tear loose from cabinets and ledgers at once, rising into the air under a wind that had not existed a second before. The master register had not been destroyed. It had been opened. My double lunged for the storming pages. Catch them. Behind me, the door gave way entirely. The soaked figures poured into the records room, not rushing to attack, rushing to retrieve. They reached upward in a frenzy I had not thought them capable of, mouths open, hands grasping at the loose papers. Some caught pages and pressed them desperately to their chests. Others failed and turned in panic circles. The order that had defined them, the calm filing, the patient waiting, the ritual intact, was breaking apart in front of me, and with it went their composure. A page slapped across my face. I ripped it away. It was a record line from 1968, ink spread but still legible. Elias Rowe, lower one transfer, pending the old man from the phone. He was suddenly there in the doorway, staring at the paper in my hand with naked disbelief. "That's me," he whispered. Something moved through the room, then not wind, not water, but recognition. It spread from page to page, person to person. The patients in the corridor were no longer shrinking back. They were staring upward as their names spun around them in the storm, some reaching, some sobbing, some too stunned to move. The new or dead, the office workers, the guards, the technicians looked less certain now, as if the loosening of the archive had loosened them too. Malik grabbed my shoulder.
What did you do?
I think I broke the order, I shouted back. Do it more. Useful. For the first time all night, something useful. The black water kept rising, not flooding outward, but lifting in impossible suspended sheets around the room. In its depths, the submerged elevator car continued to climb, carrying its silent passengers toward the surface of the pool. Every page torn from the register seemed to weaken some boundary. The tiled walls flickered between hospital age and modern office paint. Fluorescent panels overhead flashed into caged ward lights and back again. Somewhere very far above us, I heard elevators dinging on multiple floors at once. My double stood in the center of the storm with her hair whipping around her face, no longer calm, no longer knowing. "Stop this," she said, and for the first time her voice did not sound entirely like mine. There was another cadence in it now, older and more administrative, as if 1,000 clerks spoke through one throat. The records must remain intact. "No," I said. I snatched another spinning page from the air. Mira Dolan, 19, visual contact via mirror pending. A young woman in office clothes near the broken door gasped and clapped both hands over her mouth. She had been standing among the soaked figures moments earlier, blank-faced and obedient. Now her expression fractured with returning selfhood. She stared at the page as if I were holding her heartbeat. I tore it in half. The sound was tiny. The effect was not. Mira convulsed as if struck by a current. Water poured from her sleeves and trouser hems in a single rush.
Her ID badge hit the floor with a slump.
Then she fell to her knees, coughing, not dead coughing, but living, desperate. Painful coughing, and when she looked up, her eyes were no longer the glazed eyes of the retained. They were terrified, confused, human. Around the room, several of the soaked figures recoiled. One maintenance worker clutched at his chest. A nurse with a burned cap began to weep. My double saw it too. "Don't," she said, and now the word held fear. That gave me the answer. The register did not simply trap the dead. It trapped the unresolved, the misfiled, the abandoned. People turned into records because nobody had completed the act of remembering them as human beings. Their names had been used to preserve the system that forgot them. Pages whipped through the room. Hands reached. I grabbed another. Evans Score B3 machine room returned to service. An elevator technician in grease-stained coveralls stood by the far shelving unit with his jaw hanging slightly ajar. He looked as if he had drowned standing up. I did not tear his page. Instead, I shouted, "Evans Score!" His head jerked toward me. "You were in the B3 machine room?" I yelled. "You were trying to fix the logs. February 28th. You were there because the permitted range didn't make sense." His eyes widened. Memory entered him like a blade. He made a sound, half cry, half gasp, and staggered backward, clutching his temples. The water streaming from his clothes slowed. His face changed, not becoming healthy, not becoming alive, but becoming his. The blank obedience left it. The old man Elias stared at me in wonder. "Say the names," he whispered. A page struck his chest and slid down. He grabbed it with shaking hands. When he saw it, his face collapsed. Whatever fear remained in him transformed into grief. "I was on the lower list," he said. "They told us the fire wouldn't spread. They lied." Across the room, patients in office, dead alike, were beginning to seize pages from the air, reading, remembering, crying out. The chamber was no longer a filing room. It was a reckoning. My double screamed, "Stop calling them back!" But Malik had understood too. He caught a page one-handed and barked, "Tomas Ibarra." Tuesday night. Stairwell exposure. The thing in the security uniform froze. Its head twitched violently once, twice, then lifted. Its milky composure cracked. Beneath the water-swollen mask of its face, I saw recognition blaze and horror answer it. The keys on its belt began to shake. Malik's baton dropped from his hand and clattered across the wet tile. "Yeah," he said, voice breaking.
Yeah, part.
Tomas looked down at himself as if seeing his own body for the first time. Then he looked toward the black pool, toward the rising elevator within it, and terror hollowed him out. "It's not just the dead," he said. "It copies who waits. It uses routine. Badges, names, faces, reflections. Once it marks you, it grows you a place." His eyes found me. If it finishes the line, there's always a version left to keep the doors working. My double lunged at him with a hiss like steam. Malik intercepted her.
I will never forget that collision.
It was like watching two incompatible realities strike each other. Malik slammed into her shoulder, and for a fraction of a second her body glitched my face, splitting into layered afterimages. Clerk, patient, office worker, nurse, each version occupying the same outline. She hit a cabinet hard enough to send ledgers tumbling. The clipboard flew from her hand and vanished into the black pool. The submerged elevator rang its bell.
1.
The sound froze every person in the room. The car doors were opening. Not the doors in the transfer bay. The doors of the elevator inside the water. From within came a deeper darkness, and from that darkness rose a voice I had not heard before. Not male or female. Not singular. The collected register of every clerk who had ever finished a line. Outstanding entries must be reconciled. The room shook. Shelving units crashed over. Drawers spilled. Water raced across the floor, no longer contained. The modern and the old fused around us in violent flashes office ceiling tiles over caged hospital lights. Copier paper drifting among surgical charts. Badge scanners mounted on tiled walls blackened by fire. Outstanding entries. It wanted order restored. It wanted names returned to columns. And it was strongest where people accepted the category assigned to them. So I did the only thing left. I climbed onto the nearest fallen table, caught a handful of flying pages against my chest, and started reading names as loudly as I could. Not just reading, speaking them to the room like testimony. Elias Rowe. Lower 1, October 1968. They told you to wait for air. The old man sobbed openly. Mira Dolan, 19th floor. Visual contact via mirror.
You stayed late because payroll.
The young woman in office clothes stared at me, then at herself, and began to say, "No, no, no," as if waking inside a nightmare. Evan Score. B3 machine room. You came down because the logs showed a stop that didn't exist. Janitorial contractor Luis Ortega. B2, heard voices from the shaft. Carla Nguyen, reception 41, stayed for the storm. Each name hit the room like a strike of light. Each detail dragged a person half a step farther from the function they had been reduced to. The retain began to falter. Some fell to their knees.
Some screamed.
Some tried to cover their ears. Others turned on the soaked clerks nearest them, clutching at ledgers, tearing pages free. The old hierarchy of the place was collapsing under the simple force of remembered specificity. People are harder to file when they are fully seen. My double clawed her way upright, drenched and furious. The calm mask was gone. Her face now looked like mine under all my worst days stretched together, exhausted, hollow, craving surrender. "Do you think this frees them?" she shouted over the storm. They still burned. They still drowned here. They still waited. "Yes," I shouted back, though I wasn't certain. "But at least they're not yours." She looked at me with pure hate.
No.
Not hate. Desperation. Because I understood her now too. She was not simply the building's trap. She was the part of every marked person that wanted to give up and become useful to it. The copy grown from exhaustion, guilt, repetition, and the longing to stop choosing. She was what the place offered in exchange for surrender. And I hated her because some part of me still wanted what she promised. The voice from the opened underwater elevator boomed again, making the glass in the nurse's station explode outward. Custodial breach. Substitute required. My name blazed across the air. Not in light, in paperwork. Pages spun together around me into columns and forms and signatures not yet signed. The room tilted. For one lurching second, I was no longer standing on the table, but seated at a desk in the mirrored records chamber behind the elevator wall. Pen in hand, endless shelves before me, black water around my shoes. The work felt familiar, comfortable. I knew exactly where the next ledger should go. Then Malik's voice cut through it.
Lena!
He hurled something. The clipboard. He had found it in the flood and thrown it at me through the storm of papers. It struck my chest. I caught it reflexively. The top sheet was my intake line. Lena Voss 16 APR 2026-31 condition. Transfer status, blank. Still unfinished. My double saw it and smiled suddenly. She came toward me through the water, hand extended. "I can finish it for us," she said softly. The room seemed to pause around that offer. Behind her, the submerged elevator had risen fully from the pool now, resting impossibly on the water's surface. Its doors stood open on absolute blackness. Inside, the rows of clerks waited at their desks with heads bent. Hundreds of them, maybe more. Pens poised over paper, waiting for me to sit down. The easiest thing in the world would have been to let her take the clipboard. No more fear, no more guilt, no more unfinished life above. Just the order of names. Instead, I looked down at the blank line and understood one final truth. It could not hold what refused categorization. A register needs an entry format. A system needs compliant data. So I wrote the only thing that did not fit. Across both blank columns in hard black strokes, I wrote, "Not yours, my double stopped dead." The underwater elevator screamed, not mechanically, like an animal. The pages in the air ignited not with flame, but with light, every line of ink blazing white as if exposed all at once to a truth too bright for record-keeping. Names shone over the room. Dates, floors, conditions, lies, omissions. Each page became transparent, then vanished. The master register began to erase itself. The effect on the trapped was immediate and catastrophic. Some figures collapsed where they stood, not dead but released, shedding water and years as memory reclaimed them. Some dissolved into drifting ash and wet cloth. Some simply turned, saw an opening no one else could see, and walked toward it with expressions of exhausted relief. Elias Rose smiled through tears at something behind me and whispered, "About time," before fading like breath on glass. Tomas dropped to his knees in the flood, keys spilling from numb fingers. Malik lunged for him, but Tomas shook his head once. "Go," he said. "It'll take the shaft." My double came at me with a face full of total fury, but she was weakening. Parts of her slipped as she moved my face, then a nurse's, then a clerk's, then something faceless and paper-thin. She reached for the clipboard. I swung it like a weapon. The metal clip struck her cheek. She split. Split. A seam opened down the center of her body, and inside there was no flesh-only stacked forms, mirror fragments, elevator logs, employment rosters, handwritten ward lists, all crammed together into the shape of a woman. They spilled into the water in a slurry of records. The voice in the underwater elevator rose into a final, impossible shriek. Then the whole car dropped, straight down through the black pool, taking the open darkness with it. The water followed in a roaring vortex.
"Run!"
Malik shouted.
We ran.
Out of the collapsing records room, through the transfer bay as tiled walls split and modern drywall burst through behind them. Into the corridor where patients and office ghosts and half-freed clerks staggered in every direction. The place was not merely shaking now. It was unbuilding itself. The buried infirmary and the office tower were separating under strain, each refusing the other. Malik dragged Tomas over one shoulder despite the man's protests. I caught Mira by the wrist when she nearly fell, and together we crashed through the transfer bay toward the shaft ladder. Behind us, call bells rang one last time, but now they sounded less like panic and more like dismissal. At the ladder, Tomas shoved Malik away with startling strength. "No," he said. Malik stared. Tomas's face had changed. He looked clearer than before, though he was fading around the edges like film left in sunlight. "Marked means anchored," he said. "You too. April 9th. He gave Malik a sad smile. "That's why it knew where to find you." Malik's face emptied. The truth landed hard. He had never just been a rescuer. He had already been chosen. The shaft groaned overhead. Concrete rained down. "Come on!" I screamed. Tomas looked at me then, and there was gratitude in it, but also apology.
"Someone has to shut the door," he said.
Before Malik could stop him, Tomas seized the warped steel hatch hanging from its ruined hinge and threw his weight against it from below. On the other side of the shaft, something vast was climbing a rising column of wet impacts, hundreds of feet slapping metal in synchronized ascent. Malik lunged for Tomas. Tomas smiled once, small and human. Then the shaft door slammed between them. The locking wheel spun into place by itself. I heard Malik shout his name exactly once. Then the concrete above us ruptured. The ladder sheared away from the wall in a cascade of rust and bolts, and a current of freezing air sucked upward through the shaft like the building itself was inhaling. The next moments came in flashes. Malik hauling me through a side utility passage, Mira sobbing behind us, emergency lights blazing red, a service corridor becoming a modern basement hallway mid-stride, sprinklers erupting, a freight door hanging open to B3, then B2, then somehow a stairwell, then the lobby. We burst out onto polished marble under chandeliers and alarm strobes, soaked, bleeding, and coughing black water onto the immaculate floor. There were people there, living people, night cleaning staff, a concierge, 2 terrified junior bankers who had come back for forgotten laptops, a woman from building management yelling into a phone. None of them understood what they were seeing. Maybe that saved them. Behind us, every elevator in the lobby dinged at once. All 6 doors slid open, empty cars, dry floors, no one inside. Then, one by one, the displays above them blinked from floor numbers to error codes to darkness. The entire bank went dead, and stayed dead. They told the newspapers it was an electrical fire in a sub-basement mechanical room. They told tenants there had been smoke migration, sprinkler discharge, minor structural compromise, no fatalities in the current incident. They brought in engineers, remediation crews, historical consultants. The building closed for 6 months, then a year, then indefinitely. Saint Armand was eventually uncovered in the public story, though carefully. Not lower one, just enough old scandal to satisfy curiosity. There were lawsuits, insurance battles. Families appeared on the news holding photocopied records they had never been told existed. A sealed municipal archive somehow lost several boxes overnight. A few names made it back into the world. Not enough. Never enough. Mira survived. So did I. Malik did not die that night, which is somehow harder. He lived 3 months after the collapse, long enough to watch the investigations begin and to tell his account to people who wrote it down as trauma response. Long enough to start hearing radios crackle in empty rooms. Long enough to wake with wet footprints at the foot of his bed. He disappeared in July. Left his apartment unlocked, wallet on the table, shoes by the door, no sign of struggle. I knew better than to call it that. As for me, I left the firm, moved apartments, changed cities for a while, tried daylight routines, therapy, noise, crowds, anything that kept me from hearing elevator bells in empty buildings. It helped until it didn't. Because here is the part I never told the investigators. A week after the collapse, I found a page in the pocket of the suit I had worn that night. Dry, unwrinkled, folded neatly in thirds. It was my intake line. Lena Voss 16 APR 2026-31 condition. Aware transfer status. Deferred, not canceled. Deferred. I burned it in my sink until the paper blackened and curled into itself. The ash went down the drain in gray threads. That was 2 years ago. Since then, I have followed rules. No elevators after 11:30. No mirrors facing doors. No office buildings with older foundations. No answering phones when there is only breathing on the line. And never ever looking too long at my own reflection when I am exhausted. I have broken that last rule only once. Last night. I was staying late again, different city, different job, newer tower, higher floor. Rain on the windows.
Bad signal.
Empty offices. The same soft, dead hush money buildings get after midnight. I was gathering my things when I noticed my shoes were missing from under the desk. I looked up. Across the darkened office, in the black reflection of the conference room glass, a woman stood behind me holding a clipboard. She had my face.
She looked tired.
She looked relieved to finally find me. This morning, when I got to work, there was an envelope on my desk with no name on it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No letterhead. No signature. Just one typed line: the elevator will open where IT left off, and at the bottom, in fresh black ink, a note written by hand. Next time, there may not be a lobby to run to.